Welcome to The Explainer. Today we are looking at what has to be one of the most incredible, just absolute meteoric rises in the modern spirits industry. We're talking about Penelope Bourbon. This is a brand that literally went from selling bottles out of the trunk of a car to securing a 9-figure corporate buyout in just 5 short years. Okay, so let's dive into this, because the origin of this brand defies pretty much every tradition in the whiskey world. You know, the bourbon industry, it's famously dominated by these legacy families, right? People whose great-great-grandfathers were distilling sour mash way back in the 1800s. But Penelope's founder, Michael Paladini, his background was actually in tech sales and mattress startups. No joke. He didn't have some dusty family recipe handed down through generations, but what he did have was a consumer-first mindset, just a relentless hustle, and a very personal reason to start a company in the first place. Which brings us to Section 1, a toast to Penelope.
So back in 2018, Michael and his wife Kerry found out they were expecting a baby girl after struggling to conceive for a while. They already knew they were going to name her Penelope. And to commemorate this really massive moment, Michael wanted to create a bourbon that embodied the daily joy of celebrating life's pleasures, both big and small. So he teamed up with his childhood friend and neighbor, Polise, and together they set out to craft a straight bourbon whiskey that honestly anyone could appreciate.
Now, their trajectory was genuinely breathtaking. In 2018, Michael and Danny were literally selling their first 1,900 bottles out of the trunk of Michael's car in New Jersey. Why? Because absolutely no distributor would take a chance on them. But they just pounded the pavement, and by 2019, they actually secured real distribution. Fast forward to June 2022, they gained massive national credibility when their custom mash bill was featured in the super exclusive Blind Barrel's tasting kit. And then, the absolute climax of pretty much any startup's dream. In May 2023, just 5 years after launching, they got acquired by the very distillery that was producing their bourbon. Moving on to Section 2, blending for the consumer. Paladini really turned his lack of a distilling background into his biggest advantage. Instead of being completely anchored to tradition, he engineered Penelope strictly around consumer taste. He focused entirely on what modern whiskey drinkers actually wanted in their glass. To pull this off, they outsourced the actual distillation to MGP, which is now known as Ross & Squibb, over in Lawrenceburg, Indiana. But Penelope didn't just bottle standard MGP whiskey and slap a label on it. They differentiated themselves through entirely proprietary blending and some seriously creative finishing techniques. And the result of that blending strategy is their signature 4-grain bourbon. It clocks in at 75% corn, 15% wheat, 7% rye, and 3% malted barley. But here is the absolute genius part of this. They didn't just distill a 4-grain mash. They achieved this precise, balanced, and highly approachable flavor profile by custom blending 3 distinct, totally separate MGP mash bills. It was a completely unorthodox method, but it guaranteed this remarkable consistency and gave them a super easy drinking, 80-proof flagship bourbon.
Section 3, the innovative Cooper series and Architect.
Just take the Architect series, for example. It is beautifully packaged, for sure, but the liquid inside is what really turns heads. The Architect is essentially a blueprint for precision blending. They took that signature 4-grain mash bill and finished it with 2 styles of French oak staves, actually working in collaboration with Tonnellaire Redoux, which is a really renowned cooperage in France. Bottled at a punchy 104 proof, it proved Penelope wasn't just for casual sipping. They could absolutely deliver a complex, robust whiskey for the hardcore enthusiast too. Their fearless approach to flavor really shines in the Cooper series, which is where they started finishing their whiskeys in highly unusual casks from all around the world. The standout story here has to be the rosé finish. It was actually Michael's wife, Kerry, who suggested using French Grenache rosé wine casks from the southern Rhone region. And after months of trials, literally soaking oak chips just to get the exact balance right, it became a massive hit. They followed that up with Valencia, which is finished in Spanish orange wine casks, and Tokaji, finished in Hungarian sweet wine casks. Which leads us to Section 4, the massive MGP acquisition.
Yes, you are reading that number correctly. In May 2023, MGP, operating under their Luxco umbrella, acquired 100% of Penelope Bourbon for a cool $105 million upfront. And with potential earnouts based on performance, that deal could actually reach a staggering $215 million. I mean, that is a jaw-dropping valuation for a company that was only selling about 100,000 cases a year. But when you look at the underlying business logic, it actually makes perfect sense.
See, the business logic becomes super clear when you look at the margins. MGP was already distilling the whiskey for Penelope. Before the acquisition, it's estimated it was costing Penelope around $15 to create a bottle, once you factored in buying the barrels and paying the middleman. But by acquiring the brand outright, MGP essentially eliminates that middleman. Now, it's estimated it only costs them about $8 to produce that exact same bottle.
MGP wanted a premium brand for their portfolio, and Penelope was just the perfect, highly profitable plug-and-play solution.
So, what's next? Section 5. The future of Penelope. This acquisition completely transforms their ceiling. In the past, Penelope built its reputation on younger, lower-proof, highly accessible bourbons. But now, as part of MGP, Michael and Danny, who by the way stayed on to run the brand, they have direct access to MGP's deeply vaulted, ultra-aged 10-plus-year-old barrels. And at the exact same time, they aren't afraid to innovate sideways, recently jumping into the highly competitive ready-to-drink market with premium canned cocktails, like their award-winning Peach Old Fashioned.
We can really see how this builds into their upcoming releases, like the February 2026 release of their Barrel Strength Bourbon. They're evolving this multi-award-winning line by upgrading it from a 4-year age statement all the way to a 7-year age statement. It's an uncut, non-chill filtered blend, which means it retains all its natural oils and flavors, coming in at a roaring 115.2 proof. And honestly, the best part for the consumer? Despite the older, much more premium whiskey, they are keeping the retail price exactly the same at $59.99. That right there is the power of being owned by your distiller.
And we're already seeing them flex this new-aged inventory with releases like the 9-year Estate Collection Private Select. This is a program that allows retailers to pick their own single barrels from Penelope's aged stock. At 9 years old, this 4-grain mash bill has moved way beyond their younger core expressions and into genuinely mature, deeply complex bourbon territory. We're talking rich caramel, dried fruit, and heavy toasted oak. Which brings us to our final thought. Michael Paladini and Danny Polise didn't inherit a distillery. They didn't have a century-old family name etched into a rickhouse somewhere. They started with a simple desire to celebrate the birth of a daughter, and in just 5 years, through sheer consumer empathy and a total willingness to break the rules of traditional blending, they built a $100 million empire. It kind of makes you wonder, if you started today with just a great idea and a trunk full of ambition, what legacy could you build from scratch? Thanks for joining me for this explainer. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and cheers!